Welcome back to our final part 4 of erythropoiesis, that is, factors controlling erythropoiesis. There are certain factors that will control the erythropoiesis, just like how there are factors that control whether we would want to go to college or whether not. If the weather is good, it is a factor that helps us go to college, but some of us don't go even then. It's divided into three, that is, the hormonal factor, dietary factor, as well as the other factors. Now, we will talk about the hormonal factors in detail. In hormonal, those are nothing but the hormones that are present in our body. The first one we'd be talking about is the erythropoietin that is released from where? From kidney. We knew that it was kidney, but more specifically, which part of the kidney? Now you're going to know that it is mainly released from the interstitial cells of the peritubular capillary network of the kidney. And 85% of the erythropoietin is released from this part of the kidney. Then what of the remaining 15%? Is the remaining 15% coming from the aliens who exist in the outer universe? Well, no. It is mainly released from the 15% of the Kupffer cells of the liver. Now, the functions of the erythropoietin. The first one and the first function is for the pro cells. Pro cells means we're not talking about goats, we're talking about the progenitor cells. They help in the maturation and the development of the progenitor cells. And when there is development of the progenitor cells, it helps us in going to the next step, that is the precursor cells. It also helps in the maturation of the normoblast. Normoblast is nothing but the precursor cell. So it therefore helps in further maturation of the normoblast. It also increases the synthesis of the hemoglobin, which attributes to the red color of the RBCs. It also helps in the stimulation of the stem cells. Stem cells are the ones that are present before the progenitor cells. So, these stem cells will eventually lead and finally give us the RBC from the erythroid series. Now, how is the erythropoietin being regulated? Regulation as in something where the erythropoietin EPO is equal to erythropoietin. There are some factors in our body where the erythropoietin will increase and some factors which will decrease. Now, estrogen, if you see here, is the main hormone that is dominantly present in the females. So, estrogen tends to have a negative effect on erythropoietin. Now, this also answers why females have a lower hemoglobin values compared to the males. What about increased erythropoietin? Hypoxia. Hypoxia is a condition where the oxygen supply in your body, especially to the tissues, is decreased. That means decreased oxygen supply. That condition is known as a hypoxic condition. Now, if you remember in the previous video, we were talking about functional feedback. So, similarly, right now, through the functional feedback mechanism, because there is decreased supply of oxygen to the tissues, it's going to send a signal back to the kidney and ask it to produce more erythropoietin so that the process of erythropoiesis takes place and we will have more amount of RBC production through more amount of erythropoietin production. Now, also in severe cases like in anemia, anemia is where there is decreased amount of blood present in our body, in most simple terms. So, when there is less amount of blood, automatically the feedback of our body is going to ask for increased erythropoietin production so that more amount of erythropoiesis takes place and therefore more amount of RBCs are produced in the body. Now, over here, you see that renal disease causes anemia. This is a sad face. The renal disease is related to kidney. Obviously, the word renal, kidney. Kidney is the major site of production of the hormone erythropoietin. So, if the kidney is damaged, there will be no release of erythropoietin. No erythropoietin means no erythropoiesis. No erythropoiesis means no RBCs. No RBCs means anemia, and therefore the renal disease results in the anemic condition. The next hormone is the androgens. Now, unlike estrogens, the androgens are pretty useful. They help and stimulate erythropoiesis. Therefore, the males will generally have higher amount of RBC count in the body. But whereas in estrogens, this is actually, I tried to draw an bird. What I'm trying to say is, estrogens, they tend to inhibit erythropoiesis, therefore lesser RBC for us women. Now, thyroxine, cortisol, and growth hormone. Thyroxine and growth hormone are the good ones because they help in erythropoiesis. But cortisol is erythrocytosis. The clue of what erythrocytosis means is kind of given in this diagram. So, comment down below, what do you think erythrocytosis is? Having known about the hormonal factors, let's go into the dietary factors of erythropoiesis. Dietary, as if that means something that you consume on your day to day basis. Now, iron is very important because iron is a major component of hemoglobin. Now, if I split hemoglobin, it'll be nothing but heme and the protein globin. Now, heme, the major component of this heme is iron. If there is deficiency of iron, there will be reduced heme that is produced in our body. If there is reduced heme, since heme is a part of hemoglobin, reduced heme means reduced hemoglobin. And now, since heme or the hemoglobin as such is related to the red pigment, the redness, it leads to a condition known as hypochromic microcytic anemia. Now, hypo means less, chromic means color. Now, if I have answered what hypochromic is, now you know what anemia is. Now, comment down below, what do you think is microcytic? Clue is given in the previous video. Watch it and definitely do comment down below. Vitamin B12 and folic acid. Now, before we go into that, now I've written ice cubes and cement over there. Well, does that mean that we're going to construct a house with cement and are we going to eat ice creams? Now, people who have iron deficiency anemias, you're going to find one common feature in all of them. They have the tendency to eat ice cubes and cement. If you think you are eating ice cubes and cement, do not appreciate yourself. That is not a superpower. You better go and check on your iron content in the blood. Vitamin B12 and folic acid. Now, what about folic acid? Tetrahydrofluoride, THF. For the DNA to be formed, thymine is important. And for thymine to be formed, THF is important. That is nothing but tetrahydrofolate. How are you going to remember this? T and T. So tetrahydrofolate and thymine. And thymine is like a base pair. So thymine is going to help in the formation of DNA. DNA is going to help in mitosis. That is nothing but it promotes division. So therefore, if something happens to the folic acid that is present in our body, there would be reduced DNA. Reduced DNA means reduced mitosis. Reduced mitosis means that somewhere in the erythroid series, intermediate normoblast stage, let's say the mitosis stops, your RBCs are going to remain in that stage. They are not going to progress to the late normoblast. They are not going to progress to become reticulocytes and finally the RBCs, therefore leading to a condition of megaloblastic anemia. Anemia because less blood. RBCs are not formed, they are stopped at the intermediate normoblast. And megaloblastic means huge sized RBCs because they are stopped in one of the stages of erythroid series. I just gave an example that it is being stopped at intermediate, does not always mean it has to stop in intermediate. Vitamin B12, this mainly helps in the conversion of methyl tetrahydrofolate to tetrahydrofolate. Now, then the cycle continues. Which cycle continues? Cycles, trips that you go on climbing up the mountains? No, that's not the cycle I'm talking about. The cycle of this, the THF, then thymine, then DNA. So, THF, thymine, DNA, mitosis is promoted. So, if something happens to folic acid and if something happens to vitamin B12, we're going to have megaloblastic anemia. Protein, if you see the globin over here, it is mainly composed of protein. So, protein helps in the formation of globin. Now, if something happens to globin, as a whole, you know that hemoglobin is mainly related to the red pigment. So, globin, a part of hemoglobin, something happens to globin, red pigment will again be affected. If there is deficiency of protein, it would also lead to hypochromic anemia. Now, vitamin C helps in the absorption of iron. Now, copper and cobalt, these are the minerals that help or they influence the HB, that is the hemoglobin formation. Other factors. Now, what are these other factors? First one is the intrinsic factor. Now, where is this intrinsic factor coming from? The intrinsic factor is mainly related to the oxyntic cells of the stomach. It's mainly released from the oxyntic cells of the stomach. And the intrinsic factor is not going to be released all alone. It's going to be released from the oxyntic cells of the stomach along with HCl. This IF's function is to help in the absorption of vitamin B12. And by now, we do know the function of vitamin B12. What happens if there is specifically deficiency of vitamin B12? In the deficiency of vitamin B12, a patient is going to come to you and present to you mainly with a bald tongue. Now, what do you mean by a bald tongue? If you go and look at your tongue in the mirror, you're going to find so many papillae. In a person who has vitamin B12 deficiency, his tongue is going to be so crystal clear. It's going to be like a jelly, smooth, like there is nothing on the tongue. That is called as the bald tongue. Having known that it is released along with the HCl, helping in the absorption of vitamin B12, therefore, if there is something about the deficiency of IF, that is the intrinsic factor, it's going to lead to megaloblastic anemia or pernicious anemia. Now, what is pernicious anemia? This is a type of anemia that you will be mainly seeing in vitamin B12 deficiency. The environmental factors. Now, let's say that tomorrow you and I go for trekking. Trekking is a place that means, I mean to say, altitude is very high. Now, what's going to happen at high altitudes? High altitudes means decreased oxygen supply. Now, when there is decreased oxygen supply, it leads to a condition known as hypoxia. Hypoxia is going to signal our body through erythropoietin asking for increased erythropoietin production. Increased erythropoietin production means increased erythropoiesis. Increased erythropoiesis means increased RBC's production. What are the factors where we could see hypoxia? That is especially at a high altitude. Now, also people who are prone to cardiac and respiratory diseases can also be somewhat hypoxic. How? Now, in the cardiac cause, there is no sufficient pumping of blood. Now, blood mainly contains RBCs, and RBCs' function is to give oxygen to the tissues. Respiratory diseases, like there would be decreased movement. So, lesser the movements, lesser is the oxygen, the diffusion of gases through the RBCs, and therefore it would again lead to a hypoxic condition. The drugs. I'm not talking about the drugs that vasoconstrictor agents. Vasoconstrictor, something that constricts your blood vessels. Constrictor. Vaso means a word that is related to blood. So, vasoconstrictor agents. Now, cats and nucleotides. Yes, I'm talking about the cats that you will be finding crawling around in your house. That is, if you're a cat person. I'm talking about catecholamines, which is nothing but epinephrine and norepinephrine. So this CATs and the nucleotides such as CAMP, NAD, NADP+, all of them together in a way helps in increasing the erythropoiesis. More amount of erythropoiesis means more amount of RBC formation in the blood. Now this finally ends the chapter erythropoiesis for us.